So without further ado, I'd like to formally welcome you all today who are here to join us for our webinar, Your Key to Advanced Cybersecurity, Managed Detection and Response. So yes, just to reiterate, I'm Sarah Wheaton and I'm an account manager for Kane Mathrick Tech, and I'll be your host today. So thanks for joining us. I know we've got a great mix of clients that are on the line joining us for this webinar, as well as those that aren't affiliated with KMT, and we welcome you all. So we're going to be exploring how to strengthen your cybersecurity posture. And if you're interested in that, you're surely in the right place. So we are going to kick things off. I am going to first introduce to you a couple of our panelists that are joining us today. So firstly, we will have Scott Mathrick, who's going to be speaking. He's the CTO at Kane Mathrick Tech, and he brings deep technical expertise, and he'll share his insights into the frameworks and obligations that matter mostly to the CIOs and the CTOs on the line today. So, and Justin Weller, we've got on the line from Blackpoint Cyber. He's giving a little wave, and he's joining us from a completely different time zone. So please be friendly and kind to him when he's on the line, because it's nighttime where he is. So Justin has over a decade of experience in the MSP space, and he blends technical know-how with strategic thinking to help businesses understand and implement MDR effectively. So without further ado, I'm going to take you across the topics that we're covering today. Let me walk you through. So we're going to begin first with a presentation from Scott, our CTO. He's going to explore the current cyber security landscape in Australia and how MDR fits into a proactive threat detection strategy. And then following that, we'll hear from Justin Weller from Blackpoint Cyber, who will share real life examples of MDR in action and compare it to MDR, or compare MDR to EDR, and outline strategies for building cyber resilience. Finally, we'll conclude with a live question and answer session at the end, and talk about some practical resources to support your next steps. So that does lead me to tell you that if you do have questions for our team of experts here, please feel free to drop them into the Q&A at the top. So you'll see on the toolbar at the top, there's a Q&A button there. Drop them in there. We're going to store them up and then be able to present them to our panelists at the end of the session. So yeah, don't be afraid of popping questions in there. As we all know, your question's likely the same as what's in somebody else's mind, so it's helpful. Okay, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pass the reins formally over and ask Scott Mathrick to take control, and he's going to take you through his presentation.
Thank you, Sarah. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for making time to join us today. I'm going to start this presentation by giving us a bit of a lay of the land at the moment. I'll probably only speak for about 10 or 15 minutes because the real gold within this presentation is what Justin's going to be talking about when it comes to MDR, which is why I think everyone's here. So I'll go through a bit of the landscape, what we're seeing. I'll reflect on a couple of the latest government reports just to lay the sort of land of what's happening, give you a bit of an understanding of what we're seeing. So what the stats tell us first. So some of the stats that we'll go over now are straight from the government report. So these aren't my research. These are straight from the OAIC report, which I'll speak about at the end of my presentation as well. But what it tells us is that 23% of SMBs have only implemented 5 of the essential 8 controls, which we'll go through in a couple of slides shortly. Now, stats also tell us that if we turn on those 8 controls, we're 85% less to have a cyber security breach. So there's a good reason why the government have put that framework in place. 54% of companies are confident in their ability to detect a response, so namely putting the red flags up when something goes wrong. So only about half of the customer base or companies in this report are confident that they can stop something when it happens. 24% of firms express a high or extremely high confidence when it comes to their existing cyber security platform. That's down from 44% last year, and I think the main reasons for that is because of the introduction of AI and what everyone's doing at the moment. So that was quite a different stat. That's from the last 3 years actually. That's really degraded that stat there. And then 49% of companies still fear about massive loss of data. And again, it's not if it happens, it's when. That's the kind of planning and sort of thought pattern that we need to adopt to really protect ourselves and make sure that our business is in the right shape. So when it comes to generative AI, 84% of businesses believe that is going to increase employee productivity at the moment. I'm sure there's many people on this call using Copilot, ChatGPT, Gemini. There's so many of them out now. But even if you're not or using it yourself, you should be expecting that some of your staff are. And there's proper measures in place that you need to put in, especially like just the standard AI policy that when people in your company are using these tools, because they are free, they know how to use them properly so that it doesn't compromise your business and the data that they're putting in those in those chatbots and different language models. 67% are willing to go down the Gen AI path. We're seeing it here. We're using it at KMT. We've had large language models in place for about a year now, doing all our dispatch and all our triage across our service desk, which have really streamlined our business. And 60% of Aussie respondents agreed or strongly agreed that technology will lead to a catastrophic disaster. I know that sounds pretty dramatic, but the introduction of AI now into our businesses means that we have to have our cyber security in place. We need to have our platforms locked down, and there's plenty of tool sets out there that do this for you. If you're adopting Copilot, there's a best practice that Microsoft published for you that you can run some tools across your businesses and tells you how locked down your environment is and if you're AI ready to actually turn those tool sets on. And 37% of the respondents have included that they will have generative AI as part of their cyber plan. So that's the real difference in this year's report. When I say this year's, it's every 6 months that we get the report, but up, as I said, down to 24% now on the confidence of our cyber plans in place, down from 44% last year. Just to give you a quick update of what's happened. So I'm sure a lot of people on this call would have heard about this one, but we had the breach with Australian Super. That was earlier this year. So they stole or got access to 500,000 records in Australian Super. So when people went to log into their accounts, they either couldn't log in or they had a balance of $0. There was some individuals in that had about 650, I think was the highest number of Super wiped out of their accounts. So that's still ongoing now. Obviously, the platform has been restored and people have had their finances restored, but that went on and on for well over a month, and that was a ransomware attack. Some of the main ones that I'm sure everyone's heard here, one of the biggest ones is Life 360. I use it. It's a fantastic product. I've got young children, so I like to know where they are. They had a breach earlier this year where 442,000 records were released. So that was one of the bigger ones. And with the data that was released in those two, it was data that actually tracked movements of people. So that's why that was a bit different, where it had their home locations, it had their work locations. So really their movements of where they were going. We had JB Hi-Fi in January this year. They've actually come out recently and said it wasn't true, that they're actually denying that they had a ransomware attack. That's in the news. You can read about that. And then obviously we've heard about the Latitudes and the Optuses, the big ones, the Medibank one. That I think the Medibank got a lot of attention here because of the way it was handled through the media. So when they had that breach, they had people on TV. They weren't ready for it. They were saying the wrong things. They didn't know the extent of the breach of what happened, and it made the whole situation worse. So that's why Medibank was one of the biggest ones we've seen just by the way it was handled. But what are the minimum requirements and what must we do, which is why we're here? Essentially, I did mention that before. So again, 8 key things that we can do within our environments. And if we do them, it reduces our risk or our attack surface by 85%. So the first one is to patch our applications. So if we're a law firm and we're using a product such as Affinity, we need to make sure that that third party who's responsible for that app is sending us the patches, and they're actually applied in a 48-hour period or a 7-day period, depending on what the requirements are. Patching our operating system. So we should be patching our operating system, Windows 10 and Windows 11, and making sure that we're using current versions of our operating systems as well. There are some versions of Windows 10 that are already obsolete, and 25th of October this year is the date when Windows 10 is obsolete. So if you're still on Windows 10, you need to think about getting to Windows 11. MFA, it's been around for years, it's been around for 20, 30 years. We used to transfer money from a bank. They would send us an SMS. We would put the code in, same thing, but MFA now, non-negotiable on every single product you do, whether it's a VPN, it's cloud-based software. If you're going to partner with a vendor, you need to ask if they have MFA turned on their products. Restrict admin rights. I'm working on my work desktop now. I have no admin rights at all. I can't do anything. I'm allowed to do what the company lets me do. If I need to do anything else, I need to go across to the SOC, our Security Operations Center, tell them what I'm doing, and then they will then provide me access if it's a safe thing to do. App control, we all use a browser. We're working from the office, we're working at home, we're in shopping centres, we're tethered to mobile phones. We now need to protect the edge, and that's the endpoint. And that means putting proper software in your browsers to make sure that you don't go to those known bad websites. We're blocking Java, we're blocking Flash, and we're trying to stop everything that's happening in that browser that shouldn't be there. Office macros, so we should be turning macros off where possible. The reason is Office macro is a trusted Windows process. So that means if an attacker gets hold of that, they can embed what's called a payload or an executable, and then it runs because the antivirus software doesn't see that because it's a trusted Windows process, and that's how a ransomware, as a simple example, can take place. User application hardening, again, about the endpoint, making sure that we can whitelist applications as well. So if you're an accountant, you should have access to MyOb. So we're going to let MyOb run, but you probably shouldn't have access to any other third-party software. So we're going to stop that from running. So again, if you do have a breach and an attacker gets access in there, they try and run something, they simply can't. It just doesn't work. And then obviously backups. Pretty plain and simple backups. You have your production data, you have an on-site backup and an off-site backup with a different technology provider. So that's the essential 8. Again, if you do those 8 things, and it is very minimal, but if you do those 8 things, you are 85% less to suffer a cyber attack. So what's the principles as directors of a company? If you read the fine print now through ASICs, we are responsible. As a director, you are responsible for your business. Even if you don't have a cyber plan in place, it still falls with you. And I suppose a key message of this slide is even though you can't do everything, start somewhere. It could be as simple as having a cyber incident response plan, and it could be 1 page. So some plans I've seen plans that are 20 and 30 pages long that are very detailed. And then I've seen a single plan where it's literally stuck on the tea room fridge and it has all the contacts of their cyber insurance and everything they need when that does happen. They also do chase the flags ops as well. So they sit down and go, right, if this system went down, what does that do to our business? What does that do to our supply chain? And keeping records of all those events that you're doing. So if something does happen, you've got some proof there to go back to the cyber company and go, well, actually, we've done as much as we possibly could, and you need to prove that. But at the end of the day, the buck stays with you, which is why this slide here is really important. So a company called RI Advice, this was back in 2022. From a period of 2014 to 2018, they had multiple breaches, all cyber breaches. They didn't tidy their backyard up. It kept happening. And then they had a further breach. It was a ransomware breach. They were taken to court by the Supreme Court here in Sydney, and they were fined $750,000. So the directors of that business were actually fined. So this is happening now. We are seeing this. So the game's changing. The laws are changing. This law this has been in place now for about 3 or 4 years now, but it used to be at a higher revenue rate. They've now brought that down and it continues to come down. So even if you're a director of a small company, you are still at risk if you haven't got your cyber platform in place. Just to finish off quickly, again, where I said before, start somewhere is better than anywhere. There's a couple of resources that you can use. So the OAIC, it's oaic.gov.au. That's the main platform that we have here that has all the frameworks that you can get hold of, and they tell you and give you examples of what you need to do. So they have webinars, which is a really good place to start if you're not sure about MFA or the best password practices. They have all that information on those websites and they publish every single month. So all the latest things that come up, there is a really good resource there for you to get hold of and see what best practice looks like. And then also we have the ASD. So the ASD is the Australian Signals Directorate, and they are responsible for the Essential 8 framework. They have a resource library on their website. So if you don't have a policy, if you don't have an AI policy or a password policy or an MFA policy, you can go to this website and download a sample policy. It's around about there. You would have to tailor that for your own needs, but there is plenty of resources out there that can help you. You can subscribe to their newsletter, so when anything does happen, you get notified every single week. You can see there on the screen there, there's 3 tiles, on the white tiles there on the bottom right. That's the latest things that have happened that they're finding. So it's a really good avenue just to get that information if you don't have anyone that's responsible for you in your business doing that. And with that, I will hand over to Justin.
Awesome. Awesome, man. That's really cool stuff to kind of walk through. I really like that essential eight from a security perspective, because what I love about it is there's some very actionable items, right? There's just, hey, if you can do these eight things, you can see a measurable reduction. And we've actually got a lot of similar things here in America. I'm going to talk about kind of some of those as well. So for those of you that might not have been at the beginning of the call, first and foremost, thank you so much for hopping on today. I know it's super difficult to get an hour away in business, and really appreciate some time. And in 2025, may as well be asking you for a year, right? So just really appreciate it. Also, just a little bit of background on me. My name's Justin Weller. I'm one of the solutions engineers over here at Blackpoint Cyber, but I actually come from the IT service provider space. Run businesses, been the IT professional for businesses. So I've sat in the seat, done the job, lost the hair, all of those things right off the bat. My boilerplate is, I want to apologize in advance. I tend to be a little bit of a fast talker. Good news is you're probably going to get a recording of this webinar and you can turn it down to 0.75. So, all right, well, let's go ahead and kind of jump into it here just a little bit for you guys. Listen, it doesn't really matter what vertical of business that you're in. Right. It doesn't matter if you're a school, if you're a law firm, if you're a hospital or a doctor. So it doesn't really matter. The problem is that threats are getting ever changing and they're becoming increasingly complex to defend against. Scott talked a little bit earlier about AI. And if you haven't heard about AI, I don't know where you've been in the last 2 or 3 years, but it is a big deal. It's something that is going to add a ton of productivity and effectiveness to people's everyday lives. But on the converse side, just like everything else in the world, everything that's amazing also can be used and weaponized, and threat actors are using this as well. And so we're seeing a massive kind of uptick in just how difficult it is to prepare against those things. So really, what do? Do we just throw our hands up as businesses and say, okay, well, nothing we can do, let's just do these 8 things and forget about it? No. The reason why is, how do we defend against that? Well, there's really one key way that has been kind of talked about a lot in the past. Some people may have heard of this concept called defense in depth. Defense in depth, to use kind of a house analogy, is pretty simple. It's like, hey, you know what? I've got locks on my doors. So does that mean that I don't lock my windows? Well, no, of course I'm going to lock my windows. Or I've got a gate around my house. Do I leave my garage open? Well, no, I'm going to probably close both of those things, right? And the reason why I bring that up is because defense in depth is a great concept, basically saying, listen, there are multiple points of entries into a location that I don't want people to have access to. So let's make sure that we close all of them. And as new things get discovered, I want to make sure that I am closing those doors as well, but I'm not stopping to continue to protect against the other things. Here's the downside of defense in depth. Defense in depth is kind of this ephemeral kind of philosophy, right? I can talk to pretty much everybody on this call and say, hey, describe to me an excellent defense in depth strategy for security or for your personal business or whatever the case may be. And I'm probably going to get a lot of overlap. The problem is I'm not really going to get an exact answer every single time. It's kind of a fluid thing. So how did we kind of solve that problem? Well, we created these things called frameworks. And one of the things that I really liked about the framework that we talked about a little bit earlier, that essential 8, is, again, they're very practical steps, and they're very, very, if you do these particular things. What I'm going to be looking at and talking about a little bit today is kind of the other side, kind of the more conceptual side, and some different ways to kind of structure a security strategy based on various best practices and categories. Now, here's where it gets really, really cool. Kane Metric is actually doing all of this stuff already for you. So this is where it becomes really neat. I talked to you a little bit earlier about the fact that every situation is going to be a little bit different depending on the vertical that you're in. So what we did here at Blackpoint, instead of saying, okay, well, let's protect for every single possible framework that's out there, well, let's go ahead and find the framework that can cover about 80% of every single vertical to make them as cyber resilient as possible. And then as individual verticalizations for various industries come up, well, let's go ahead and make those the anomalies, but we'll standardize across these 5. So we kind of created this 5 pillars, and it's actually based off of the NIST cybersecurity frameworks. NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology here in America, and they kind of came up with this framework that's going to be kind of a number of things. The first thing is, oops, actually, when do I get the, there we go. So the first thing that we have to do, there's 5 key pillars based in the NIST framework. The first pillar is identify. Listen, concept here, super duper simple. If I don't know what to protect, I can't protect it, right? This is where you have the ability to document your network, understand the things that you have to protect. And, you know, I know Camtech, they do a lot of really cool things with this stuff. They've got software that has the ability to kind of document the various assets, the organization, the user accounts, and all of those things, and really kind of have the ability to handle some of that essential 8 stuff, like patching, not just operating systems, but applications and their levels and what's actually installed and what's out of scope or what's out of compliance at that point in time. So we've really got to make sure that we can identify what it is that we want to protect. Now, the second thing is you got to protect it. Surprise, right? So we know what it is to actually protect, but now let's go ahead and do it. And again, what we've been talking about already, this is basically taking your attack surface and reducing it down as small as humanly possible. You know, we want to reduce things like multi-factor authentication. Listen, I work in security, been in IT for years, run businesses. I am very aware that it can be annoying. Security is tough. You've got this constant lever that's being pulled and balanced, right? The more secure something is, sometimes it's a little bit harder to use, or the easier the use, the less secure that it actually is. But when you put these various things in play, you can find that really good balance inside of there for you to be able to do your jobs every single day, but also make sure that you're protected as much as humanly possible. Now, we also talked a little bit about this as well, where we talk about this principle of least privilege. This is basically where it's saying, listen, only give access to what people need access to be able to do their job, and as long as they need access to do it. You know, Scott gave a really great story at the end of the day. Scott is a very capable technical individual. However, even he doesn't have the ability to run certain things inside of his organization without going to the security operations center, getting the authorization. And my gut tells me they're asking him, okay, great, what are you doing and how long do you need that access for? And then as soon as he's done doing the thing that he needs to do, they remove that access away. So everything is very controlled and really making sure that that things are kind of adhering to the standards, and any anomalies are watched very closely. Now, here's where we kind of go, the best laid plans of mice and men, right? I know what I've got to identify. I know what to protect at this point in time, and I've reduced the attack surfaces. But listen, the reality is that people are still getting in. They're circumventing these solutions. Security has been a cat and mouse game from the very beginning of time, right? As soon as one thing gets closed up, they're trying to find another way in. There's always going to be people that are looking to get the data that you guys have and the information that you want them not to have, so that way you can pay them to either get it back or not deliver it to somebody else. That's kind of the reality of it, and it's been the same ever since. Now, this right here is where we kind of hear a lot about one piece of what to detect and not a lot about another piece that we want to detect. Now, I'm sure everybody on this call has heard of malware before, right? In 2025, we know what malware is. Malware is basically malicious code, malicious software that tries to get run, like the stuff that Scott was talking about, that gets involved like with macros inside of Word, right? If they run them in a trusted process, this is where they're going to kind of get kicked off. But also sometimes, listen, your number one attack vector are the people inside of your companies, right? What these people are trying to do is they're trying to get them to click a link. They're trying to get them to do something legitimate to run those payloads. And really, what you want some sort of endpoint detection and response, or EDR, that we were talking about a little bit earlier. You want that for those scenarios, right? When somebody double clicks something that's malicious, I want that to be able to be stopped because that attack is happening right now. The other side of the house that doesn't get talked about a whole heck of a lot is this thing called living off the land hacker tradecraft. And my gut tells me, based on many of these that I've done, that that is probably a lesser known thing. So for what live off the land hacker tradecraft is, this is actually behavior that threat actors are using to hide themselves from those traditional IT security solutions like endpoint detection and response. They're doing pretty much 2 things. Keep in mind, threat actors are at their best when they're pretending to be IT people. when they hide amongst the noise, when they're not tripping the wires. And so what they're going to do is they're going to use legitimate built-in administrative tools that are in the operating system, things like PowerShell, things like command line prompts, right? Built-in Windows operating system admin tools that are designed for your technicians at, the technicians at KM Tech to be able to actually do their jobs while you're still doing yours, right? They're not kicking you off your machine for 3 hours to fix some problems or whatever the case may be. Now, the other thing they're doing is they're taking legitimate third-party tools that are designed to make their techs' jobs easier and automate some of the discovery of like finding out, mapping a network and just getting a lay of the land for your organization and what's available. And they're actually weaponizing those tools to make their jobs easier as threat actors to gather that recon. And these are all things that happen at the very, very beginning. And this is where you need to make sure that you have a solid managed detection and response product that is going to catch that type of behavior. And we'll talk about why here in a couple of minutes. Now, I know what to protect. I've reduced the attack surface. I'm detecting someone's in. You got to respond. And this is where, as a security organization, it makes it really cool to work with an organization like Camtech, because I know that they have actually started with a premise. And their premise is that, okay, if I'm going to build a cybersecurity stack, and I'm going to be responsible for protecting businesses, I need to start with the assumption that those businesses are going to get breached. And then I want to work my attack pattern backwards directly from there. Because at the end of the day, we hear these stats, years ago where everyone's talking about, man, threat actors are inside of networks for, 74 days before they get caught. Listen, when we talk about nation state espionage, when we talk about corporate espionage, yeah, those stats are probably pretty close, because they're trying to not get caught. For small to medium-sized businesses, mid-market businesses, what they're trying to do is they're trying to get in, hit you with a payload, and then get out. They want to get paid as quickly as humanly possible. So you've got to be able to not just detect and respond, but you have to be able to respond quickly. Now, we have this concept here called the boom, right? That shout out to my marketing team for that awesome graphic in that red line there. But the boom is not how long threat actors have been in a network. They are not when you get into a network. The boom is when they do what they want to do, regardless of what their end game is, whether it's data exfiltration, whether it's ransomware, whether it's double extortion, where they kind of leak out little pieces of your data, then ransomware, you pay the ransom and then come back later and say, oh, we've got your data, you better let us know, pay us again. And they keep trying to come back.
Okay, I'm just going to step in. I think we may have lost the audio from Justin. I'm just going to give him a couple of seconds to see if that comes back. Am I right in thinking I'll get a nod from Scott if it also has stopped from your end? Yeah, okay. Oh, here he is. He's back. So Justin, you're probably unaware. You're in a vortex over there in
Oh, yeah,
the
I
US.
had absolutely no idea.
We lost you there.
How long ago did you lose me?
Well, about 15, no, it wasn't 15 minutes. It's only a very short
I was like,
time.
okay, round it back up again.
Yeah, no, it was only very couple of minutes, not even a minute ago. So you were just rounding out your number 5 there. So I'm going to throw back to you and put myself on mute.
No problem. So I was talking about kind of that right of boom portion at that point in time, right? So this is when threat actors have actually made their attack. However, in the event that a worst case scenario happens where that comes to play, we want to make sure that you can live to fight another day. So you still have to be able to recover from those. This is where Camtech has products like business continuity, disaster recovery, right? We talked about incident response plans, those kinds of things that you want to be able to have, cyber insurance, right? Digital forensics. This is kind of the stuff that says, hey, in the worst case scenario, let's get you back up and running and let's figure out a way to kind of get this all back on track. Now, this is where threat actors live. Threat actors live in this third pillar. And you take a look here at these bookends, right? We've got the plan, and then we've got completing the objective. The problem is what happens in between those two bookends is never linear. Sometimes they're going to execute a payload right away. Oftentimes they're not, right? So while EDR is really important to have, we're seeing a massive downturn in file-based attacks, right? So the EDR is not only happening at the very end of the attack cycle. Keep in mind, EDR is only kicking off when the attack happens, right? So we don't even want to rely solely on EDR. Again, do you want to get rid of it? No. You need malware detection. You need next-gen antivirus for those kind of one-off situations. But what we're focusing on is having a managed detection and response product that is going to do these things. We are going to focus on the intrusion. So when the glass breaks, you need an EDR solution that finds them at that point. Why? Or an MDR solution that finds them at that point. Why? Well, because it happens at the beginning of the attack cycle. The second thing is that they're going to probably start digging around. Now, there's various ways that they dig around, whether they start taking a look at mapping the network, whether they're trying to escalate privileges, whether they're trying to see if they can get to other devices by laterally spreading, as we see. All of these things are going to happen in pretty much every single attack cycle, regardless of their end game, and it's going to happen at the very early part of the attack cycle. And that's where it's cool, because KMTech is actually partnered with an organization that does those things. But it's also very, very important to make sure that you define these three letters. When we say managed in managed detection and response, we mean fully managed. Okay, at the end of the day, we wake up every single day and we fight bad guys at the early part of the attack cycle. That's our goal. When we say detect, we talked about the very, very important thing of distinguishing between, you want to be able to detect the malicious software as well as the malicious behavior that happens at the early part of the attack cycle. But the most important thing is the R. Being able to detect things is great, but if you can't respond, it really doesn't mean anything, right? So in 2025, at a bare minimum, MDR companies need to make sure that they're in a spot where they say, listen, we've seen some suspicious behavior. We smell some smoke, right? We've done an investigation. We've identified that there's a fire. They need to put the fire out. And then once they put that fire out, then the goal is to make sure that they can get in touch and help you with the cleanup on that side. Any kind of questions coming through on any of this stuff? I know I'm saying a lot of words at this point in time. Just wanted to kind of double check on this.
There's no questions
No?
through at the moment, but that is a good trigger for anyone that's sitting on a question, just to pop it in the Q&A up the top there.
Okay, awesome. All right, let's go ahead and jump back over here really quick. So I want to kind of talk about some of the threat landscape, right? You know, Scott did some really cool stats in the very beginning. I want to talk a little bit about kind of what we're seeing inside of our SOC. This is kind of based on our internal data and kind of what we're seeing here as an organization. The first thing is we're seeing a surge in critical vulnerability exploits. I mean, it's tough out there right now for hardware vendors, for software vendors. I mean, they're doing the best that they can, but the truth is there's a literal army of people that are trying to find the holes that can be poked inside of their solutions. And so we've actually sent out over 30 major threat notices highlighting ongoing exploitation of critical vulnerabilities, whether it be in software, whether it be in hardware. And they're using these things to gain that persistence, to move laterally and exfiltrate that data before launching their attacks. But again, the good news is, regardless of how they're getting in, partners with KMTech or have a technology to be able to find them at the early part of that discovery. The second thing is we're seeing a rising pre-ransomware activity. You know, it's crazy. As we'll talk about here in a second, identity is a primary target. It's not just email addresses, right? It's, how you're logging in with your Google account to other organizations or logging in with your M365 account. If they can gain legitimate access, they kind of have the keys to whatever kingdom that you have keys to. It's pretty much kind of that simple, right? And because of that, while we're seeing a massive uptick in identity as a primary target, unfortunately, ransomware is still very prevalent. It is unfortunately very, very profitable, and it doesn't appear to be going away anytime soon. So what does this tell us? Well, this means that threat actors are using anything and everything to bypass these traditional defenses. And, I'm going to talk about kind of a story that is kind of unique from what I'm used to seeing. You heard me talk a little bit earlier regarding what I call lateral spread. Lateral spread basically says, hey, listen, I am on this machine or I'm in this M365 account. What I now want to do is I want to see if I can spread my authority somewhere. I want to see if I can get to another machine. Maybe I want to get to where the data's at, or I want to get to a more powerful account. And oftentimes we've really only seen this from a lateral spread portion from like a cloud to a cloud account, or an on-premise to an on-premise account. Think like a desktop to a server or desktop to another desktop or something of that nature. Something that we actually identified here at Blackpoint not too long ago was one of the first identifications of a cloud environment that was deploying malware onto an endpoint environment. So it was laterally spreading from the cloud to the actual endpoint itself. And I want to talk about that here a little bit. So Microsoft Intune is basically a tool that Microsoft delivers to administer Windows machines, right? That's the easiest way for me to kind of put it. You can push applications to many machines. You can patch many machines through Microsoft Intune. However, it's a cloud-based remote control and management solution. And what's unique about it is that in this area, we found that a threat actor was able to compromise a cloud Microsoft account using probably some phishing or some sort of other credential theft. They were then able to pivot to a cloud support account, basically giving them massive admin credentials, right? They could do permissions to kind of do whatever they wanted to do at that point in time. And here we're able to see that the first thing they did was they created a custom remediation script inside of Microsoft Intune, basically saying, I want to, a script is just basically commands that are given to a machine delivered remotely in order. And then they set that script to run every single day on every single device. That then got pushed down all the way to the bottom of every single one of those machines. And then what it will basically do is it sends this, what we call a PowerShell script, to that and executes it. Now, keep in mind, because like Scott was talking about earlier, similar with like Microsoft M365 macros, also, Intune is a trusted Windows process. It has basically full admin rights to do whatever it wants to do at the lowest and deepest levels inside of the Microsoft Windows operating system. So these are things that are just going to run with the highest level of permissions. What that was able to do is I want to kind of run through what makes this super unique. This particular product or this particular customer, they actually did not have any kind of cloud protection enabled at that point in time. They were in the middle of an onboarding, and all we had were agents that were installed on the on-premise server itself. What our security operations center personnel was able to do is they were able to find that it was attacked on the endpoint itself, the server itself. They reverse engineered the PowerShell script, and they identified that that script was attempting to connect to a Russian domain, downloading what we call Redline Stealer. Redline Stealer is a remote access tool. It creates kind of a backdoor for threat actors to kind of work remotely from Russia on this particular machine. We then isolated that device in question. So when you talk about a response, you have to be able to kick those threat actors out. You've got to be able to lock down their M365 account. You got to be able to isolate the device so they no longer have access to it anymore, which is what KM Tech can actually do. But because of that, we then saw that the activity was sourcing from a Microsoft IP address, and that policy had been compromised and modified to distribute malware. We were then able to continue to kind of take a look, right? We knew that the fire had started. We put that fire out on that machine, and then we started to take a look to see if the fire spread. We identified that it had spread, and then we automatically started isolating those devices. Here's what we did differently than most other SOCs that are going to be out there. We actually contacted the customer and the partner and said, hey, listen, we're identifying this is coming from the cloud environment. Can we get our cloud product installed in your cloud environment? We then instantly, within minutes, was able to identify that there were suspicious logins happening on other accounts. We were able to isolate the additional compromised accounts, locking the threat actor out and preventing the spread of the malware. So this was something where they spread from a cloud to an on-premise account at that point in time. From there, we were able to identify that was happening because our humans took a look at it, and we got our product onboarded. We not only saved the actual endpoints themselves, but we were actually able to save the cloud accounts as well. Why am I bringing all this up? Well, I'm bringing all of this up because this is super complex. This is just not something that any automated tool is going to find out for you. So what is it that you guys can actually do? Well, talk tracks, AI-driven automation by the adversary, that is going up. We're seeing that dramatically here in 2025. We're also seeing a massive identity-based attacks info stealers and browser exploitations, what we're seeing a lot of right now are people are Googling, let's say QuickBooks 2025. Well, guess what? Threat actors are now buying Google ads and they are putting them up there. And now you click on that Google ad thinking you're downloading a legitimate software and double clicking those softwares. We're also seeing traditional hacking and identity attacks, and then posture management is the next key. So here's the question: what does unified protection look like? And I know I've kind of gone a little over time, so I apologize on that. The first thing that you need to have is you need to have it partner with an organization that can give you contextual awareness. Having the ability to be able to take all of these data points, put them together, and weave a story of what's actually happening is incredibly important. We also have to be proactive and reactive at the same time. It's just where we're at in 2025. Being on the defensive is no longer good enough. And you also have to have comprehensive coverage. So you got to consolidate tool stacks and focus on the tools that are designed to work together for your guys' businesses. So with that, I think I am solid. Apologize for the technical difficulty there, but I will pass it on back to Sarah.
Thanks, everybody. I want to say a special big thank you to Justin and also to Scott for joining us today. Covered off on so much, and we really appreciate the time that you spent with us, both Justin and Scott, as well as everybody on the line joining us today. So I'm Sarah Wheaton from KMT, and thank you for joining us. I'm going to sign off here.